everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of The Blind Spot. Today, we're going to be talking about cosmology, which should be really exciting. But before we begin, I want to note I'm wearing my New York Mets shirt. The Mets currently are in first place. Now, any of you who actually follow the Mets know that it's nothing but sorrow and suffering. So odds are we're going to stay in first all the way up until September, in which case we will lose every game until we get knocked out of we don't even get to but for right now, it's a beautiful moment. So I just wanted to, acknowledge that it's a beautiful moment for all the Mets fans out there. Okay, let's get started.
All right. Celebrating that moment in the evolution of the cosmos as we know it here and now, we are going to segue into cosmology. And I am in Aarhus, Denmark, where I've been since, I guess, the middle of May. I'm going to be here till the middle of June. So I'm in a guest apartment, a little bit echoey, but it's a lovely place to be. And I suppose Denmark is an appropriate place to talk about physics. We're not going to talk about quantum physics, however. We're going to talk about cosmology. And you two are going to have to take the lead on that because that's your expertise. But I thought maybe we should really start with an overview of, let's say, the basics of cosmology today, of modern cosmology, how we understand that science in its current form, how it came to have the picture that it has, or the pictures that it has, and then maybe we'd move from there into some of our critical points about it from the blind spot. So the state of play in modern cosmology, maybe Marcelo, that's one you should take a first pass at, since you've actually worked in that area of science.
Papers, Marcelo's actually published papers, and I've certainly taught the graduate courses, but Marcelo has generated new knowledge in this field. So, Marcelo,
maybe too many papers, I sometimes wonder. But sure. So right from the beginning, cosmology is the study of the origin of evolution of the universe. So it's a kind of physics that is very particular because it's really a historical physics, and we're trying to reconstruct the past of the universe so that we understand why it looks this way in the present. That's the idea. So just like an archaeologist, go and do like excavations to look for statues or artifacts that can help them reconstruct the past of a culture or civilization. Cosmology does something like that as well. We go out into the universe, we meaning the astronomers that actually do the data collection, and not us theorists.
None of us. Yeah, no one in this room.
I know, it's sad, but basically they go and look for clues, for clues from the past, so that we can use that to create models of how the universe evolved in time. So that's kind of like the big picture of what cosmology is like, right? And of course, you could give a whole course on cosmology and the history of cosmology. We're not doing this here. We can say just from the beginning, and I'm sure, Adam, you're going to agree with me, that the standard model of cosmology, which is what we call the model that describes the Big Bang Theory and all that, is one of the greatest triumphs of science of the 20th century. It is an absolutely spectacular model, right? I mean, because it is very hard to make statements about the universe as a whole. One thing is to go to the lab and study a crystal and say, oh, look, it has this kind of matrix or kind of lattice structure. The other thing is to make statements about the history of the universe that started. First of all, when did it start, right? That's the first question, right? And the fact that we can actually say with certainty some very fundamental things about the universe is just spectacular. And I have to say, when I was a kid, when I was studying physics, the reason why I went into cosmology was a book by Steven Weinberg, the amazing, brilliant particle/relativistic theorist, Nobel Prize winner for unifying the electromagnetic and the weak interactions. He wrote a book that I read, I don't know, maybe in 1979 or 19, called The First 3 Minutes. Right? I mean, Genesis, science style, right?
So can I jump in there? Can I jump in and ask a question
Right.
that I think might, certainly I'd be interested to hear what you'd say, and I think some of our listeners would too. So when I first encountered that title, when I was a teenager, when I encountered that book, my dad had that book, and I read the first 3 minutes, I thought, oh, that's really cool. And then I thought, wait a minute, there's no sun. So like, how are we measuring minutes? What does this mean? So say something about that.
Yeah. So when we talk about minutes here, we really mean Earth minutes, like, how us humans are measuring time as it passes from the beginning of time, right? And so he does. So this is late 70s, I think, 79, 80, when he published this book, right? Something like that. So he used the knowledge of the time to basically say, look, we can reconstruct the history of the universe, not from time equals zero. We're going to go into that later, but from a fraction of a second after that beginning that we still don't know very much, but we'll talk about that a lot later. Till the formation of galaxies. Of course, there are lots of holes to be filled in, but then, the last 5 decades, we've learned a hell of a lot about the universe, right? And so, Adam, I think,
I just wanted to jump in 2 things just about that book, because also that book was absolutely essential for me. I actually got fired from a Pizza Hut in college because I spent I was supposed to be making pizzas. And I was spending my time in the back room reading the book when I was an undergraduate at Boulder, Colorado. Because, it was just stunning. And the idea that I just wanted to point out one way to answer that question. And I think, Marcel, actually, as we discuss this, maybe it's interesting for us to separate out the idea. There's 2 parts of cosmology. One is the general relativity, the standard model for the evolution of space and time. And then the other part is the particles, the standard model of particle physics. And the thing is, there's actually a clock, or there are clocks built into both of them, but particularly the particles have all of these decay times, there's all of this physics built into the particles that we've learned from particle accelerators that actually give little clocks that tell us like how things proceeded along as the universe expanded and cooled, which is the other clock given by general relativity. So I just wanted to sort of throw that in, and maybe it'll be useful for us to talk about as we're sort of talking about what has happened in cosmology, what we do understand, how there are these 2 parts. There's general relativity, Einstein, and then there's the standard model of particle physics, which really is the quantum mechanics, where the quantum mechanics came from. So sorry, Marcelo.
No, that's totally cool. And so the history basically is that, so Einstein publishes his momentous paper on the theory of general relativity in 1915, right? The Prussian Academy of Sciences. And he basically said something very beautiful. The equations say something like this. On the left side, you have geometry. On the right side, you have energy and matter. And what that meant is that if you tell me what the distribution of energy and matter because of the E equals mc squared equation, so that you can relate the two, if you tell me what the distribution of matter and energy is, I can tell you how that energy and matter bends space-time. So bends space, and it affects the flow of time, right? And then from that point on, applying general relativity was, give me a certain distribution of energy and matter, a star, a neutron star, a black hole, and I solve the equations and find out what the geometry is like, right? So what's really amazing, though, Einstein was something else. So in 1915, by that time, he proposes 3 tests of the general theory of relativity, right? One is to show that that matter can actually bend space. And he did that using the trajectory of light from stars. And in 1919, people actually went to an expedition in Brazil, actually, and one in Africa, and proved that he was right. He calculated, look, if a light from the star comes from far away and goes by the sun, it will bend its trajectory because of the curvature of space around the sun. He calculated by how much. The measurements were somewhat iffy, but close enough that it vindicated his theory. So that was one test. The other test was called gravitational redshift, which means that basically time slows down in strong gravitational fields. And that one was tested, I think, in 1960 at Harvard. They put basically two decaying atoms, right? One on the first floor of a building, the one on the sixth floor of a building, and there was a delay of the one on the bottom floor because it was closer to the Earth and gravity was stronger, and he did that one. And then the third one was about the funny orbit of Mercury.
Yeah, the
and they had some deviations, right? It's called the precession of the perihelion of Mercury. Now, why am I saying all this? Is because those three tests that he proposed originally are all solar system tests. They're all local. But then in 1917, he does the big thing, right? Which is what starts modern cosmology, which is, okay, so what if I approximate the distribution of matter and energy on the right side of the equation for the whole universe and solve for the geometry of the universe? So just pause for a second, right? I said, I get pencil and paper, I have an equation, and by solving that equation, I can tell you what is the geometry of the whole universe. Right.
If I can just note, Marcelo, can I just jump in? Because when we talk about geometry, we mean both like the shape, the space, and time. It's also how time is flowing. Because when we talk about geometry, we really mean space-time. So it's both how time will flow through the entire universe, as well as the curvature, the geometry, so to speak, of the universe as a whole. And one thing to note is he could only do that by assuming that it was still kind of a local calculation, because he had to assume that the matter and energy was smoothly distributed. And we're going to come back to that because that's kind of an issue. But that's what he needed in order to make that calculation.
Right. So that was called the cosmological principle. And that's important to go back to that. And so basically the idea is that if you look out into the sky, right? I mean, you're going to see just local stars, and they look very unevenly distributed. Like there's some here, there's Orion, there's this, there's that. However, if you could step back, right, and step out of our galaxy and look out into the universe. By the way, when he wrote his theory and when he wrote this paper, people didn't even know that there were more galaxies than the Milky Way.
Right. I mean, no one knew that there were other galaxies. Unbelievable.
Right? Right. So he says, just assume, like the way I explain this when I teach a classes like that, you know how you make minestrone soup, right? So you get a bunch of vegetables, like a piece of potato and carrots and stuff like that. And it's very uneven, right? But then what you do is you blend it and you make a creamy soup.
Yeah.
Right? And so the puree of matter spread across the universe. So on the largest scales, if you look left, if you look right, the universe on average looks the same. That's what the cosmological principle means. And if you do that, you massively simplify the equation, which is why he did it. And on top of that, he said, let's also assume that the universe is static. Because in 1917, there was absolutely no reason. There were a few results about galaxies possibly being redshifted by this guy, Vestal Slipher, who's an American.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think it's Slipher, and he was 1912, but Einstein didn't know about this, and it wasn't really conclusive. But he said, let's assume, and this is the beauty of modeling, right? We'll go back to this all the time, because physics is really about the art of modeling. It's like amazing, right? You make these simplifications, and the idea is that they will not kill the science. The simplification will just simplify the work and give you some of the truth of what's really going on, right? That's the hope anyways. So he solves the equation, right? And then it's a static universe, spherical, very Platonic, right? Let's assume spherical symmetry, static, the universe is all the same everywhere. And then whenever you solve an equation in physics, you have to test it to make sure that it's a stable solution. That means that if you have a ball of stuff, right, you don't want it to crunch, right? If it's your universe and it's static, it has to be a stable thing. So you do something that we use all the time in physics, which is really, I love it, and I use a lot in it's called perturbation theory.
Yeah.
So you just poke it, right? I mean, so here's my sphere. Let's go and see what happens. And so when he did that, to his horror, the thing collapsed. So a static universe with a homogeneous distribution of matter, which is what you do when you put the blender in, it's unstable, right? It's not static. It's not a stable solution.
Well, it'll either collapse. Well, no, right. Right. It could expand depending on what you did for energy, but for normal energy, matter
because
energy,
of gravity being attractive.
Right. It collapses on itself. Yeah.
But so then, and the reason I'm telling you, I'm not going to go over the whole history of cosmology at all, but he adds another ingredient to his solution. He says, okay, this sucks, but what can I do here to make this work? So he's like, what if I add this extra term in the equation on the right-hand side, this extra term in the equation, and it's kind of like a negative pressure thing. So what it does is it counterbalances the attraction of gravity. So it's not really an anti-gravity, but it's because, the gravity is still attractive, but it's just this extra thing that can counterbalance the collapse so that the thing becomes stable. And that thing became known as the cosmological constant. And he showed, it's a very simple calculation actually, that if you add that term, you don't violate energy conservation, momentum conservation, which are sort of like the sacred cows of physics, right? And so mathematically was an okay thing to do. He wasn't spoiling his theory. So then he got his static solution.
Can I ask a question though? Because this is my own question.
Yeah.
The idea that, whenever I see something like the gravitational constant called negative pressure, I'm always like, that seems counterintuitive to me, especially as a fluid dynamicist, because, I think of pressure as something which pushes a balloon apart, right? Why does a balloon stay up? It's because of the atoms bouncing against the walls of the balloon, keeping it inflated. If I put the balloon in a refrigerator and cool the air down, the balloon will shrink. So could you just explain what they mean by negative pressure, that the cosmological constant, or these other forms of exotic matter, which we'll see when we want to keep wormholes open or do exotic things? Why are they called negative pressure?
Yeah, so this only happens in general relativity, this idea of negative pressure. If you write, so the way we model a gas, so that's what you do. You get a gas, a gas is a bunch of molecules moving around. They have a certain energy per volume, which we call energy density. So there is something that we call the equation of state of a gas, right? And the equation of state of a gas has the relationship between the energy density and the pressure. And usually, as you say, if you have a hot gas, it's positive pressure, right? It wants to expand, and then the pressure is basically the force of the molecules hitting your container, so to speak. So you want them to go up, right? So a substance that has negative pressure would do the opposite, but it adds positively to the energy momentum of the universe. So the way, if you write the equation of state for this thing, you can have always energy density is positive. So energy is positive, right? I mean, that's still going. But you can create a substance that has negative pressure. And for example, let's see. Well, we talk about, in physics, we talk a lot about, I'm going to make a drawing. I don't know if that's going to work or not, folks, but let's try it. Here's my paper, okay? Let's see if I can do this. So if you have some substance, we can talk about, I'm going to show the picture after I draw it, okay? So here's my axis. Let's see if I get this right, okay? This is total improvisation. This is really on the fly, folks. It has some energy, which we can call the potential energy. So for example, if you have a system, can you guys see this? You have a system, so let's see, where does it start? Yeah, so the ball starts here and it rolls down to its minimum and it's going to bounce around the minimum a little bit until it rests.
In a well, it's going to roll down into the well, right?
Yeah, so this kind of system, which is very, very common in physics, right? If you put your ball up here and you write the energy and the the energy pressure of a system like this, what you will find, surprisingly, is that this excess energy has a negative pressure. Okay? And what does that do is you have to think of it like this. You have a material that is stretchy, like a rubber band. So usually when you stretch a rubber band, it wants to go back in. But a material that has potential energy like this in the universe, it's general relativity, so it's a little more complicated, will actually do the opposite. It will go out. So negative pressure is something that instead of making things go in like this, it will go that way. And so so that's more or less what's going on with the theory. And that's what the cosmological constant does. So there is a very famous theory of cosmology, which is called inflationary theory.
We'll be coming back to this, right?
That basically fits that cosmological constant is this excess energy. And that is what makes the universe, as not Einstein, but after Einstein, people found out this cosmological constant has the effect of, since it's kind of like an anti-gravity or stretch space effect, it makes it go very fast out, right? So that's an exponentially fast expansion. Anyway, so it's not very hard to fill up the universe with stuff like this, actually. The difference is that the cosmological constant is always constant, right? It's there. And just jumping ahead, in 1933, when Einstein went to visit Edwin Hubble in California, and Hubble showed that the galaxies are actually moving away from one another, so that the universe is not static. Einstein said famously that was his biggest blunder, was to force the universe to be static with this extra cosmological constant, when in fact, what Edwin Hubble discovered in 1929 is that the universe is actually expanding, meaning the galaxies are not moving away from one another like shrapnel from a bomb that exploded, but they're being dragged out by the universe, by the space itself stretching outwards.
Yeah, so maybe as from the astronomical point of view, let me just pick up a little bit on that part, right? So so what we get with Einstein is a model of the universe, right? A theoretical model of the universe that has a homogeneous space-time, right? Everywhere you go, space-time has the same properties. And originally his model that he built, because everybody, and this is an important, actually, I wanted us to touch on this. He wanted a universe that was static, because that's what kind of what everybody believed, right? There was a way in which, a static universe is an internal and unchanging universe, which is the one that philosophically made the most sense to scientists. Obviously, there was, if you're Christian, coming from or Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, then you think the universe had a beginning. But for most scientists, they wanted an eternal, unchanging universe. And, that's going to be a philosophical idea that's going to be important that we're going to have to come back to. But so then in the 20s, particularly Edwin Hubble and again, this is actually the important point here is about technology, using the greatest telescope that existed at the time, allowing him to see further and with more clarity, was able to make measurements of the motion of galaxies relative to the Milky Way. And what he found, surprisingly, was they were all moving away from us. Every galaxy was moving away from us. And so either that is a fluke, or it indicates that the universe itself is expanding. And as Marcelo said, it's the idea that if every galaxy is redshifted, what we mean by redshifted is there's a tie between whether the galaxy, the shift in light from the universe, whether it's towards the red or towards the blue, its velocity. If it's blue shifted, if the light has been shifted towards the blue in wavelength, it means it's coming towards you. If it's been shifted towards the red, it means it's moving away from you. And so what Hubble found was not only was every galaxy red shifted, meaning moving away from us, the further away it was, the faster it appeared to be moving from us. And that is indicative of a kind of expansion that you would expect, or a kind of motion that you'd expect if everything was expanding away from everything else. And so Hubble then, even in his original paper, Hubble didn't say, he was like, hey, just presenting the results. But he already knew that this was going to indicate that the universe itself was expanding. This was not motion of galaxies through space. This was the motion of space, and the galaxies were just kind of pinned to this sort of elastic sheet or this elastic sphere that was expanding in radius.
So it's like the pizza dough you were supposed to have been stretching back there in Pizza Hut, right?
Yeah, hiding out, listening to Steely Dan.
Yeah, it's all stretching out like it's being kneaded. Yeah.
So I think that closes out now for us the first part. So what Einstein gave us was a theory, what we call the standard model of, or at least of the part of the standard model of cosmology, which is just the expansion of the universe, right, at a certain rate. That basic expansion is what that model of space and time is what we're going to pour into what we call the standard model of particle physics, which is all the matter energy in the universe and how it evolves as the universe itself expands. So we have an expanding universe, and now we're going to pour everything we know about particle physics into it in order to tell the story of how matter evolved in this. So Marcelo, why don't you, because that's also your field. You're
right. So this is beautiful, right? Think about this. I think it's so remarkable that actually humans were able to do something like this, tell the story of the universe. I mean, it's kind of remarkable to me that we can actually do this and do it well with precision, right? Because what came out of this whole story of expansion is that you can think of all the galaxies moving away from one another in the future, but if you play the movie backwards, right, that means that the galaxies are actually in the past coming closer and closer to one another, closer and closer to one another, becoming more and more contained into a smaller volume until at some point in the past, they're going to all be jammed together in a very tiny place. And how long does that take? Is the age of the universe, right? So the universe now has a story. It has a beginning, which we'll talk about later. It has a middle, and it has a future, because, what's going to be happening in the future. And what happened then after this whole story with Einstein and Hubble was the Second World War happened. And all the physicists were much more occupied in designing radars and nuclear weapons and stuff like that. So there was a pause until the end of the Second World War. And then right in the late 40s, 1948, 49, a couple of ideas came out, competing ideas about, okay, let's put everything that we've learned about nuclear physics into this universe, because and these people knew already, if you squeeze matter together into a small volume, it gets hot, right? And so you can equate, and this is amazing because you can think of the universe as a sphere just for now, right? So you have this sphere, and if it's getting smaller, so the radius of the sphere is getting smaller, the temperature is getting higher, and you can use the equations of cosmology to write a relationship between size and temperature. Right? And so you can tell, when the universe was in time, because size and time are connected. So you can say, I have a clock, which is the cosmological clock now, which is the clock that tells the story of the universe from its beginning to now. And if you go backwards in time, and it's funny because Hubble, when he wrote his paper, he knew that that was the case. And then he said, I can estimate how long it took for the galaxies to all be jammed together. And it was about 2 billion years in his numbers. And that was a real problem because people already knew that the Earth was about 4 billion years, 4.5 billion years. I'm like, damn, how could the daughter be older than the mother? Right? That doesn't work, man. You can't have the planet being older. So there was a problem with the measurements, of course. And then in 1953, a guy called Walter Baade, using the 200, so a telescope that was twice as powerful as Hubble's in the same place, I think it was a Mount Wilson, 200 inch, said that it's okay, the universe is older than 4 billion years.
He redid Hubble's measurements and found Hubble's mistake. And so then the age of the universe got longer, or the age of the universe. Yeah.
Right, which is a beautiful way of explaining how technology helps us figure things out and tell the story better and refine our theories and models, right?
Yeah, and which is going to be an important part for all of us as we think about the nature of science and what happens in science is how it's always technology. Like just doing theory alone in your room is never enough. We are embodied creatures. We build equipment to extend our sense perceptions. And that's the only way we learn things. So like just purely sitting in a room doing metaphysics is never enough. You know, you have to get your hands dirty encountering the world. So anyway, that's an aside. We'll leave that for later.
Yeah. All right. So then, it was kind of cool historically because people were thinking about nuclear energy. And so in 1948, 49, two groups. So there was one in Cambridge. It was the Bondi, Gold, and Hoyle, right? Fred Hoyle. They came up and said, you know what, this this theory of the beginning expanding sounds too biblical. We don't like this stuff. So let's instead create what they call the steady state model, which was, it's okay, the universe is expanding, but as it expands, new matter is being created to fill in the blanks so that it doesn't become more rarefied, right? Because when things...
one atom every light year, square light year or parsec, it was very the matter was just slowly appearing, little chunks of matter slowly appearing as the universe.
To keep the balance. And
yes.
Why is it called steady state, right? So imagine you are taking a bathtub, you are in a bathtub, right? And then you take off the plug. So water is coming out, but now you turn on the faucet. And if the faucet is bringing in water at the same rate that water is coming out, the level of water in the bathtub will remain the same. That's steady state. So you're losing as much as you're gaining. So things on average are the same. So they said, let's make matter to compensate for the decreasing amount of energy density, energy over volume. The volume is growing. To keep things in check. And I said, but wait, that violates the sacred cow conservation of energy. And they said, okay, now you go measure the creation of one atom of hydrogen per light year, per century or something like that. And you can't do that, right? So they said, yeah, maybe there is violation of energy. We don't know. We only know within the precision of our instruments. So that was the steady state. And then in the United States, George Gamow and Ralph Alpher and Robert Herman were coming up with the completely different idea that, the universe has a story. It was hotter in the beginning. And, and as matter gets hotter, it breaks down into its fundamental components. So molecules break down into atoms, and you keep going backwards. The atoms, which are now protons, neutrons, and electrons, if you go closer to the beginning, hotter, electrons get off, and now you just have protons and neutrons floating around of small nuclei, and you keep going backwards. Now even that connection is lost because the heat basically breaks the bonds between protons and neutrons and protons and protons, and you just have a soup of protons, neutrons, electrons, and photons, which are the particles of light. So now you have this primordial soup. And when was that? At about 1 minute after the beginning. That's what Steven Weinberg was talking about in his book.
Yeah, Marcel, can I just jump in here just to sort of
Please.
Frame that idea a little bit more? So what George Gamow was doing with his student Ralph Alpher was because this idea actually goes it goes even further back to Lemaitre, right? I mean, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was the first one to propose what we now call the Big Bang. That the universe started off, he called it the primordial atom. I think this was like mid-30s or something.
31 or 30.
Yeah.
I think 31, yeah.
So it was the idea that the universe started out, we didn't, what's interesting, this is important for us, nobody actually said anything about the beginning, like the actual moment of creation. All they said, all of these models started off with was that the universe at a much earlier stage, was hot, it was dense, right? And it was expanding. That's all you have to start with. You don't have to say anything about what the actual beginning was. And then from that, you could use what you understood about particle physics, about how particles transform into each other as given the energy that they have, to sort of now make a story as the universe. So the universe starts off hot, super dense, and super small, so to speak. The radius, we're gonna have to talk about what we mean by the radius of this. At some point, we're gonna have to talk about the weirdness of the idea of thinking about the universe as a whole. But so as the universe expands, it cools down, and now the kinds of particle reactions you can get changes as it cools down. So as Marcelo was saying, when you start off, it's so hot that all you have are, especially when they were doing that calculation, were light particles, photons, electrons, and neutrons. Is that right? No. Well, I guess
protons, neutrons, neutrinos, and that's it. Right. It was a very small recipe because
that's
they didn't know
it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so then the whole story of the universe then and then they tracked out the next minute or two, all the way, the calculation they could do was all the way up to the creation of, as things cool down, you actually get, various kinds of transformations. And for a while, for a very brief moment, the entire universe is as hot and dense as the inside of a star. And there you can get fusion, you can get reactions where protons and neutrons collide, and they start to make helium. They start to make the first heavier elements other than hydrogen. Hydrogen is just one proton and an electron. And so so those first 3 minutes that Weinberg was talking about was the time when the primordial elements are formed. Now, Gamma was hoping you could make all the elements that way, all the way up to uranium. But it turns out that because the universe is still expanding, it's still cooling. So there's only a brief window there where you could get nuclear fusion happening. So it turns out that actually everything else does actually have to, gold, etc., has to be made in stars. So this was the beginning of this idea of using particle physics to tell the story of the transformations that led to what we see today in the universe. So Marcel, just actually, I just, given in the interest of time, maybe we should wind a little bit forward just to say sort of where we're at now with that story. We've got general relativity, we've got particle physics, but how far back does particle physics take us before we're actually we're outside of experiments and we're just making stuff up?
Yeah, so that's wonderful. And we can say with confidence now, because, we understand the electromagnetic and weak interactions and how they seem to behave as a single force at very high energies. And so high energies you can associate with high temperatures. Where does that fall in the history of the universe? 1 trillionth of a second after the Bang. So 10 to minus 12 seconds after the Bang. That's more or less the time scale of the evolution of the universe, where the electromagnetic and the weak interactions, which were tested at CERN, and the Higgs was found. When Weinberg wrote this book, people didn't know the Higgs existed. It was a speculation, but now it's been found. So we can say that we more or less, and that we can say we understand completely what was going on there, but that the universe was this hot plasma where above that temperature means closer to the zero, time equals zero, the electromagnetic and the weak interactions were behaving similarly. They're not a unified theory. We can go back and discuss that later. I mean, it is unified in some ways, but not in the way people like to think about unification of forces. But the point is, we can go back there, and the experiments at CERN now, they're basically recreating the conditions of the universe when it was 1 trillionth of a second old.
So that's the thing. So from 1 trillionth of a second onward, we're in pretty good shape, right?
Pretty good shape.
Now let's just tell a little bit more of the story after that. So, okay, so after, so you can start the clock at 1 trillionth of a second after the moment of creation, or whatever you want to call it. And you can track all of the particle interactions. You can track the formation of the first elements, and the universe continues to expand. And now, once you start getting past that point, now we're getting into what we might call macro astrophysical, macro cosmological forces. Because the main thing that happens is that there are little, the universe is smooth, but it's not entirely smooth. There are little density inhomogeneities, little nuggets, so to speak. And as the universe expands and cools, gravity starts grabbing hold of those little nuggets. And the stuff that is slightly more dense than the stuff around it starts pulling material towards it. And those serve as the seeds of the structure, the galaxies, the clusters of galaxies, the superclusters of galaxies that we see today. And so we've been able to track now quite well the evolution of those seeds into the large-scale distribution of matter in the universe, which is really very spongy. You know, the universe today has galaxies arrayed into clusters, superclusters, and then giant voids, you know, regions that are 700 million light years across with nothing in them. And the model of cosmology that we have today starts from all the way back then, and then tracks the distribution, the evolution of matter into this structure, and is able to make, you know, we have detailed 3D maps of where all the galaxies, not all, but, you know, trillions of galaxies, maybe it's not trillions, I'm not sure what we're up to, but certainly hundreds of millions of galaxies and their structure. And the model that we have, which includes dark energy, which we're going to have to talk about, which includes dark matter, which we have to talk about, and the regular forces, does a pretty damn good job of describing the structure of matter that we see now. The arrangement in the universe of all of that stuff into galaxies, clusters of galaxies, and superclusters of galaxies. Go ahead.
I just want to throw one other thing in there, so that hopefully we can come back to it. And that is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is really not something I know that much about, but my understanding is if we go back to that trillionth of a second, and then we try to go back, and then we try to go back, and we want to go to time equals zero, that the values all go to infinity, that there's a singularity, and then we don't really know what to say. That there's a kind of fundamental limit we hit, where because the values are going to infinity, we sort of lose our grip on nature, as it were. So talk about that, just so we have that side of the story. We might want to come back to it, but just maybe throw out what's going on there, so that, because I'm sure listeners are wondering, oh yeah, trillionth of a second, but what about t equals zero?
Well, it's funny because that's where we're going to argue that the blind spot begins to show up. So Marcelo, I'll let you pick up. But before we go though, let me just to close this out. So what we have now, the model that we have now, what we call the standard model of cosmology, works pretty well at late times. It works pretty well from, if you're looking at the universe, sort of for the last half of its evolution. But it's going to be, as we're going to see, it's going to be at earlier times now that more and more problems are beginning to show up with it. And certainly some of these problems track back to what we're claiming happens at the earliest time. So Marcelo, I'll let you take it from there.
Right. So singularities, right? Everybody has done division, and if you divide by zero, you're in trouble, right? And anything, and essentially that's exactly what happens with the general theory of relativity, the one that we describe the universe as a whole, is what we call a classical theory, meaning there's no quantum physics in it, right? And so what happens there is that it maps the energy in a certain volume of space. And that's, again, it's called the energy density, is the most important number that we use when we are doing models of cosmology. And if you have a certain amount of energy in a certain volume, and this volume starts to become smaller and smaller, and you're dividing the energy over volume, which is energy density, when the volume becomes really tiny, this thing explodes up, right? And if it goes to zero, it goes to infinity, as you're saying. So according to the classical theory of relativity describing the universe, if the universe really started as a point, which has zero volume, then all the physical quantities have some sort of singularity in it, right? And so the energy goes up to infinity, pressure, all that kind of stuff. And so clearly there is something going on there. And what people would say is that, well, because you can't use a classical theory to describe very tiny distances because that's the realm of quantum physics, not of classical physics, right? And so people then say, okay, whatever is going on very early in the universe has to do with quantum physics. So let's keep that in a bubble, and we'll go back to that later when we talk about the origin. Now,
put a pin in it, as Ezra Klein says. I love it.
Put a pin in it. There you go. And we'll get back to that later. But so as Adam was saying, we have this really beautiful theory that describes quite well what's going on with the universe, how it went from particles to nuclei, simple nuclei. So it's beautiful because you have the era of particle physics, which is very, very, very early on. And then you have the era of nuclear physics, which is when the smallest nuclei, like not just hydrogen, but the isotopes of hydrogen, deuterium, tritium, and then helium-4, helium-3, and lithium-7. Those basic elements were made in the first 3 minutes. And then why couldn't you make the other ones? Well, because, to make heavier elements, you have to get a bunch of protons together. But the universe was expanding and the protons were moving away from one another. They just couldn't find each other. So you kind of stop there. And as Adam was saying, you have these extra nuggets of matter. What kind of matter? Good question. Mostly those protons starts to get together, but also possibly dark matter, as we'll discuss later. It's supposed to be the big catalyst for making stuff. And then at a few millions of years after the Big Bang, you start making the first stars. However, there's one important thing we did not mention, which is essential, which is that when the universe was about 400,000 years old, 380,000 years old, something remarkable happened, which was that before this time, so before 400,000 years, protons and electrons would come together and move away from one another because the photons, the particles of light, basically that filled up the whole universe, had so much energy. It was sort of a love triangle. Protons are positive, electrons are negative. Come kiss me. Let's be together. And then comes the photon, bam. No, come with me. But with the expansion of the universe, the photons get less energy, and eventually protons and electrons finally bond, make hydrogen atoms. So at about 380,000 years after the bang, you start making the first atoms of hydrogen. And the photons, who lost the love triangle, start to free stream across space.
They're left lonely. They have no one to partner with. And they become fossils because of that. They become, right. And then they're just there for the rest of eternity, wandering space lonely until.
And they became what's now called the cosmic microwave background radiation. Right.
Nobel Prize 1964, the discovery. So we could go into the story of that discovery, which is because it took place in New Jersey. Thank you very much. But it was by it was a mistake. It was a total mistake. These guys tripped over fossils. They were trying to do something else. I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into it, but just these astronomers they were using this instrument to try and find something else. They had this noise they couldn't get rid of. And it turns out they were like echoes of creation. They were echoes from the earliest. Okay, we won't go further.
Well, no, they were working for AT&T Bell Labs, right? That and they had a radio telescope. So instead of looking for light, they're looking for radio waves, which are just very long wave light. And because they wanted to talk about satellite communications, right? 1964, 5. And as you said, there was the humming, right? There was a bzz, kind of like background noise, like shh, and what the heck is this? They didn't know.
Every direction they pointed the telescope in, they still got the same hum. They thought it was bird poop for a while.
Yeah,
they thought
it was pigeons. Yeah,
there were pigeons roosting in it. Yeah.
And then they were like, I don't know what the heck is going on. Let me go talk to the theorists at Princeton, which is what they did. And the guys at Princeton were building a radio telescope because Gamow, in the late 40s, early 50s, with those papers, he predicted that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Son of a gun.
One of the greatest stories in physics of anticipation. Gamow, 1949, sees like, oh, by the way, if my theory of the Big Bang, he didn't call it the Big Bang, is true, the universe should be full of microwaves. 20 years later or whatever, these guys are, looking for something else, and they trip over the signal that he predicted.
And so the guys at Princeton, so God damn it, and those labs that have money always beat the poor university labs. So that's not fair. So end of story, they got the Nobel Prize for discovering this background radiation, right? So very happy accident, man. I mean, it's pretty, and they deserved it because their measurements were really good. So there is this, again, technology changing the history.
Yeah. And they knew to
look how many times, right? It's so important to remember that. Anyway,
so it's at 50 minutes, so we should probably we're obviously not going to get to in this section, which is fine though. Hopefully we offered everybody a nice tour of this beautiful, amazing subject. And then maybe, next time we can get to sort of like where we're at right now and why there are these enormous problems. So, Marcelo and I, we've done a couple of New York Times op-eds, which have either gotten us in trouble or not, depending on
who you talk to.
Yeah, saying that, like, look, and we're not the only ones saying that. There's clearly a problem that's happening with these models at the early universe and their connection now, even more so. And for us, this is really pointing to something about the blind spot. It points to something about the way we can misuse models or not include ourselves. So we'll come to that next week. But maybe we should just sort of sum up sort of what we've done. So what do you think? So, like, if you're offering people, like, where are we at now?
Right. So perfect. Because late 60s, Gamov's idea that the universe did have a beginning and it was hot and dense and it expanded with the prediction of the cosmic microwave background that was now confirmed wins. So the so-called steady state, the one that violated conservation of energy, creating new atoms, is dead. And so that's when the whole world converged into this, okay, let's figure out the history of the universe then using this theory. And we go from nuclear to particle physics to a speculative physics as we get closer and closer to time t equals 0. And that's where the problem starts. So we're going to end by saying that's where the problem starts.
That's where the problem starts. And one thing I, as a philosopher, would like to pick up on next time is how some physicists have thought that cosmology actually gives us an answer to the age-old philosophical religious question of why there is something rather than nothing, and how that's a really deep confusion between a kind of question that is scientifically addressable and a kind of question that is not scientifically addressable, at least in the way that we think about science in the context of this discussion. So I want to make sure we come back to that.
Yeah, let's do it, because that's one of the things, that's really one of the things that we're going to argue the blind spot appears is this, one of the things for us is that this idea that science is totalizing. It answers every question. There is no question that science is not. And it's just a misunderstanding about what science can do, what it can't do, what happens when we pretend we're not there, when we try and take that, that God's eye. Nothing is more God's eye view than trying to see cosmology as being all explaining of all possibilities and all human questions. So, so we'll pick it up there next week. So,
yeah.
Yes.
Basically, beautiful physics, bad philosophy, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Though it does get to, it also gets to bad physics. I mean, not bad physics, but we could say sort of misuse of physics, or
or misleading, or to a lot of hype, and there's a whole Hawking / God issue that we can go back to and discuss later. I knew this was going to happen. I mean, come on. How can you tell the history of the universe in less than 50 minutes? It's impossible.
That's right. Impossible.
And it's so awesome, right?
But isn't it fun to do the dive into? Because every time the story gets told, every time, it's just like, wow, we're going to criticize later on, but what cosmology achieved, what cosmologists and astronomers, not just physicists, astrophysicists achieved was epic. I mean, it is truly one of the greatest achievements of the human intellect. What has been built with cosmology? We don't ever want
it's absolutely amazing. And, if you're a little kid and you read about cosmology in a book for kids or a teenager, it's immediately like one of the most gripping things in science. It's absolutely incredible.
You know why? Because it's the story of who we are.
Exactly.
Our story. Right. One of the beautiful things about this whole thing of cosmology is that this is us. This is how we came to be. And so, no kidding, it's awesome. Because
it's mythic. It's mythic. It's about where we came from, where we are, where we're going. Yeah. It's a mythic frame.
And let's next time also try and pick up on that mythic idea, because Marcelo and I both written about this, about the role of cosmology as a modern mythic system. That every culture has its origin story, and it plays sort of a very, very important, fundamental, and religious or spiritual role. And it's a mistake. People will not be like, well, cosmology, there's nothing about science that is, that speaks to that. And, both of us have argued like, no, it's built right in there. I mean, the science isn't, we're using methodologies of science, but the reason we respond to it and how we respond, and the reason we can get into trouble when we think that we're going back to T=0 and getting the God's eye view, is that old mythic thing we need is being entrained, right? So,
yeah.
All right.
It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop.
All right. Very good. All right.
Well, let's do it.
Guys. Great talking. Hey, see everybody. See you next week.
See you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.